Hey there, welcome to today's episode. It's going to be a live unedited session. As you can see, I bought myself an Ableton Move. Spent my own money on this. I'm not affiliated with Ableton in any way. And this is just my first impression, first little beat making session video where we can talk about the basics, getting started, look at some of the features and functions. My first impressions of it are very good, and I just want to start off by talking about who this is for, who it's designed for. It's a sketchpad for Ableton, so really if you're an Ableton user, it's really going to suit you. I think the misconception here, because it is technically a standalone little groove box with sampling, that it's somehow designed to compete with MPCs, and of course we've had all the negative comments about, well, there's only 4 tracks and it's got a tiny screen and you can't do sample chopping in the way that you want to do it. You've got to think about it. Let's be fair, Ableton aren't going to give you another device that competes with their flagship standalone Push 3. Why would they bother? If you want all the bells and whistles, you want a DAW inside of a box, standalone, buy that, or buy an MPC, buy one of those equivalents, because that's what they are. If you're looking for a DAW in a box and you want all the bells and whistles, this isn't going to be the device for you. This device is for those that want to start making beats. You want to do it intuitively, in a fun and easy way. It's still more complex than I think it appears, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. There are some limitations that people have been moaning about, but actually I think there are workarounds for those. But it is a sketchpad for Ableton. It's for cooking up ideas, and I think it's a little mini powerhouse in the sense that if you look at the tech specs on this, 2 GB of RAM and a quad-core ARM processor. So when we talk about something that is limited, I think this device is deliberately limited. You had the Teenage Engineering KO2. That thing to me was a bit of a joke, if I'm being honest. I've never had good things to say about that. That was limited with 64 megabytes of internal storage, no resampling. It was limited just because, in my opinion, it was a bit of bad gear. It wasn't very good. This thing is deliberately limited, and the way that we know that is because we've got 2 GB of RAM, the quad-core processor. That's very similar to something like an MPC-1. Now, some people are going to argue, well, if it's that powerful, why don't they give us all the features of the MPC-1? But then I think you're missing the point of what this is about. If you have all those features, it's more menus, it's more shortcuts, it's more options. It means you just get lost in the process. And as I said, if you want a DAW in a box, go and buy one of those products instead. Just, save your money. You don't have to buy this thing when these products are launched. People moan about them as if they're almost forced into having to buy them. But this is what it is. It is a sketchpad for making ideas, beats, sketches very quickly. I would still argue that I could make 99% of my beat here, and seamlessly I can move it over into Ableton and finish it off. That's exactly what it's for. Doesn't compete with the Push 2, the Push 3, where you've got everything that you need. It is something completely different, and hopefully this video will show you what it's capable of. We're going to start, and I'm going to assume that you've gone past the Wi-Fi setup phase. Talk about some things I'd like to see as well as we're moving through. This has a roadmap. Ableton have already said that. Wherever there is a roadmap, that means there are updates to be found, things that they are planning. Technically though, I don't really want them to add a bunch of big features. I don't think it needs much more. I think there are just some small quality of life things that it needs in order to make it really fun to use. It already is fun, but I think it could be, a step above. You'll notice I've also still got the little tab on my display. I'm not taking that off until I find something to cover it with. I'm very precious about my gear and I like having little screensavers, but apologies if you find that annoying. Shouldn't really get in the way, but I'm not taking it off until I've found one that I can replace it with. This is the layout. I really like the layout because it's wide, it's narrow, it's small. In terms of the size of this thing, unless someone shows you it against like a full-size Push, you'll realize it's not the same width as a Push. I think that's what I was thinking, that this was kind of like a third of a Push in terms of its height, but the same width. It's not. It's actually narrower. It's quite small. You'll see against my hands here, it's a small device, but that means it's genuinely portable. The build quality is excellent. It's cold to the touch, so I'm assuming it's aluminium in terms of the top surface, and that is the same underneath as well. So actually, aluminium top and bottom means it's made well. It feels robust, doesn't feel plastic or flimsy. The Push 3 and Push 2, the buttons on those kind of notorious for needing to really give them a good press. This isn't like that, just very nice, easy, very simple little clicky buttons. A nice intuitive layout. When you look at its competitors in the same price bracket, we're talking about something like the SP404 Mark II, and I can't really think of much. You've got the SP, You've also got the Novation Circuit, which is cheaper, and then you've got the KO2, which I don't rate at all. But those are kind of the competitors that you have in that bracket. This thing just feels really good. And unlike the SP, you don't have to dive through a bunch of menus and shortcuts. That thing you need to remember, 2 fingers here and 2 fingers here, just to access certain menus. This is laid out so well. Now, maybe that is because it is simplified in some way, but I would argue that if you've got the right mindset, you can turn this into a bit of a beat-making monster. So I'm going to assume you've gone past the setup phase, the putting in your Wi-Fi password, getting hooked up to the internet and doing your firmware update. You are greeted with this, which is an empty set, or a view where you house all of your empty sets. You can call them sets, projects, beats, sketches, whatever you want to call them. You've got 32 slots in order to do that. Again, a limitation. There is no external expansion of storage on this device, so what you see is what you get. There's no SD card slots. Sure, it would have been nice to have seen one of those. Who doesn't like the idea of expanding the storage? But you get 64 gigabytes of internal memory, and 50 of those gigabytes are dedicated to user samples. So I think that's plenty. In terms of sample size, you're talking about, kilobytes and megabytes, not a huge amount in terms of samples. 50 gig, you're going to be fine, particularly because this is a sketchpad. So we've got that to take into consideration. You have a separate manager. There's an application, so you want to move samples on and off of the device. You can do that via the Wi-Fi connection, or you can wire the device directly into your laptop, your iMac, whatever it is, and you can transfer files that way. All seems to work pretty well. Not found any great bugs so far. Of course, there will probably be some. We are talking about firmware version 1. And just keep that in mind. Yeah, we're going to be at the beginning of an adventure here. Who knows what will happen with future updates. But I hope they keep it kind of lean and mean, because I think that's kind of the benefit of this thing. Empty projects. We can choose any of these pads to create a new empty set. You'll notice I've made one, and if you just bought one of these, you'll see 4 demo sets in the bottom. I took those out. You can delete the demo sets. Once I've listened to a demo, what exactly do I need it for? It was all very nice. It was a good way to listen to the internal speakers, which I would say they're adequate. They're okay. You're in a quiet environment. You want to noodle around. You don't want to put headphones on. You're going to get away with it, but they're like laptop speakers. They're not going to blow you away, the quality of these things. Anyway, you've got them though. It's a nice bonus. Same with the built-in microphone. Not a lot of these portable little devices, particularly at the price point. Even some of the more expensive things, you don't get like internal speakers on the MPC-1. You're not getting a built-in microphone. You've got that on this little thing. Approximately 4 hours, they think, of battery life. This is plugged in because I've only just took this thing out the box. I don't know how much charge it's got, so I'm hoping that it's charging as we're doing this. I haven't looked into that, but I'm assuming it must charge whilst you're using the device. Anyway, we've got our sets here. I've got one set that I created myself, and you'll notice I've named it template. One of the first firmware updates I'd like to see is the ability to name the sets from the device. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be a dick and I want to get ahead of things and be like, oh, why doesn't it do this already? I say that because when you set up the device, you get access to a little menu here, a little alphabet, and you've got the encoder. That's how you put your Wi-Fi password in. You've got uppercase, lowercase numbers. So why can we not do that to name the sets on the device? Because the functionality is clearly there. Hopefully in a firmware update, we'll see that. I'm not going to be diving through this video, oh, well, why don't we get 8 tracks? Why don't we get 100 tracks? It's not that. It's just that I've seen that functionality here already. So why can't we name things? Because it's there. We should be able to do that. Anyway, a template. It was named via the manager, the application that goes along with it. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But on one of these videos that was talking about this device, they were asking the Ableton representatives, could you set a template so that when you boot on the device, it's kind of saved as it goes? And actually the representative said no, but that's not strictly true. And I'll show you how I've created a template in a moment. Let's start though with the basics. You choose any one of these as an empty set. To load the set, you can press any of the 4 track buttons down the side. So just press 1. It randomizes and gives 4 different random instruments and presets per track. The only thing that stays the same is that usually the first track at the top is a drum rack. You can hear that. The one underneath will be some kind of bass. And then I think you've got 2 melodics underneath. Can be synths, they might be wind instruments, they could be anything out of the built-in preset library. I think there's 1,500 samples, presets, sounds that built into this thing. Plenty to get you started. I like to load in my own things, and that's where the template comes in. But that's how it works. It randomizes those. I look at it like this. You give somebody a canvas, and you start them off with red, blue, and pink paint. They get a certain outcome. You give them another canvas, and this time you give them black, green, and grey. You're going to get a different outcome. The point, though, is that really what you're doing is you're not spending a lot of time choosing the paint. You've just got paint and brushes, and you can just crack on and get into it. I think that's what they're trying to do with this. It's a sketch pad. So let's just give you a bunch of instruments and sounds. You can just start noodling away and come up with ideas. Every single one of the 4 tracks can be completely customized. So if you don't like the drum rack or the drum kit that it's currently loaded up in, you can dive in and change that, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Same with any of the synth engines and that kind of stuff. You can change the type for every track. So you just want to have 4 drum racks, you can, 4 synths, you can. Plenty of flexibility. So even though you create something that starts random, you can still customize it. That brings me on to the idea of creating a custom template, because for me, a big workflow thing is I want to start in the same way. I'm just kind of like that. I don't particularly want a bunch of random instruments. Chances are I'll never use them. So I want to start in my own way. The way that you do that is you create one random set, and then you change it to whatever you want, and then you can save that as a template. It's very simple. That's all you really need to do. So at the beginning here, let's say it was our first track. I'll show you how you can change these. You select the track that you want to change, the instrument type, and when you press the encoder once, you'll see it highlights the whole group, all of these symbols. That means you're looking at it on an instrument level. So if I press the encoder now, that's what I can do. I can change this, so I could try a different preset, a different drum kit, because that's what we're working with. If I move back in the menu, and you've got a back button, or you can use back from the top here with the encoder, but back is easier from the button. I can go through, I could choose a different type of kit, or I could choose something completely different. The one thing I want to show you is that at the bottom of this list is we have a thing called templates. So they are like initialized instruments, if you will. Got a drum kit. When I load this up, it is a drum kit, but it is a blank drum kit. And if I go back again, I could load up one drum kit that has a choke group in. We've got a gated kit, a blank sampler, and then you've got, I suppose, initialized synths. So the analog, got a bunch of those, blank canvases that you can make your own, FM, and the wavetable synths as well. So if you want templates, just blank things to start building your own, you can come in and set it up. So that's exactly what I did. I chose each of my 4 tracks and put in what I wanted to get to every time I turn on the device. If I want to go back, I do that. I do shift here and I press this. First step will take us back to our set overview, shift and the first step. So you'll see I could access my template. I don't need this. This was a set that we just loaded, of course, that we could come back to and play around with it, but I don't want it, so I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to just hold delete the X, tap it again. That is deleted. You need to be careful because there's no undo for the deleting. It's the same with samples and things later on. Just be careful with your deleting. You might get into trouble if you accidentally delete something that you really needed. The way this works as a template is that we have to set it up completely blank. If I load it up, I'll show you. Press any track to load it. I've got a blank drum kit. The next one is the same. It's essentially a drum kit, but it's called a choke kit because it has a choke group applied. So when you chop up a sample, it's going to be useful. The one underneath is a blank sampler, and the one underneath that is also a blank sampler. Those are the things that I think I'm going to need and I want every time. But I don't want to tweak this because if I tweak that, I'm tweaking my template. So I go shift, step 1, go back. And what I'll do is I'll copy that each time I'm starting. So I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. So I've made a duplicate of my template to get started. If I want to make sure I don't, accidentally tweak the wrong one, they're the same color, I can do shift, press this particular template, and you'll notice color or upload to cloud. We're going to change the color, and I'll just change it to any random color that is different from the red that we've got here already. So I've now created a duplicate of that. I will load this up again. Any track I like, we'll open it up. I'm going to start at the top with my empty drum kit. So I've shown you how you can swap the tracks out with individual instruments. You can change from drum kits to synths. Do that very simply. Make sure everything is highlighted. You can move over one step like this, and you can dive through that menu. When we want to change a pad, this is a blank kit. You'll notice as I just select the pad, it moves over to pad sample. But if you need to, you can select that as well. You can scroll over and select pad sample. I now want to load in some samples. Inside of the Move Manager, I created a few folders just to get started, uploaded a few samples of my own onto the device. It was very simple, very easy, and now I can access those. When I press the encoder now, because the pad sample is selected, it opens up all the WAV files, all the samples. You start with all of Ableton's, and there's a ton of those you can go through, plenty of stuff to get you started. When you add your own samples, or you record something onto the device, these two menu options will show up. So you've got user samples or user recordings, both very handy. I'm going to go into user samples, and I'm going to go to my kicks, and you just scroll through. You want to audition them, you just press the pad. Let's say I like this one, click it again, and that is loaded into the kit. We'll do it again for a couple of other pads. Let's just do a very basic drum kit. Same thing that I do in most of my videos when I'm just showing you how to do something. We'll take a hi-hat. Not going to be fussy, just pretty much whichever the first ones we come to. But I want to use my own samples just so that it's kind of unique to me. We'll go to snares. And that's good enough. So we've loaded 3 samples in. Can play around with those. Pads are very responsive. They feel really nice on this device. No sensitivity settings that I've discovered yet. Maybe that'll come in firmware, but actually, just as they are, they sound really good. You'll notice I've currently got fixed velocity on, but let's just turn that off so we can demo this. You do shift, and it's this little button here. You know, fixed velocity is now off. It's a pretty nice curve and sensitivity setting. Easy to do finger drumming, easy to get a nice range even of velocity that you can play around with. I'm going to put fixed velocity back on though, just for now, just while we're auditioning things. Just be aware that you can do that. So we've got our samples loaded into the pads, first part of our drum kit. So that is one track that we're now kind of using. Of course, I can come down and I can add other things in. But let's take a look at some of the parameters that can be tweaked within the drum kit. So once you've selected sample, you notice you get the waveform on the display, which is nice. This is a small waveform, small view, if you like, a small LCD screen. I know there's a lot of complaints about that, but I think it's there and it's designed like that, so it's not going to be distracting. You don't want to be distracted when you're working with too much. It gives you enough information, but really, I don't need the giant screen. I don't need all of that. So just keep that in mind as you're working. This is fine. It's giving you enough information, everything that you'll want from it. If I want to play around with it on a pad basis, I can start using my touch encoders, and I've got 8 of these across the top. As you tap them, it tells you what they do. So this one, transpose, a whopping plus and minus 48 semitones you can pitch up and down by, which is great. The next one, you'll see it's just a little line, and that's because it's the sample start. So if we choose something like a snare drum, I can adjust the sample start. When it comes to sample chopping, you can use the sample start. There isn't really a sample endpoint. The chopping on this is manual. I'll show that in another video at some point. We'll deep dive into that, but it's adequate. You can definitely do sample chops on this, okay? One thing to keep in mind here though, when you do shift, you can zoom in. So as I press this, you'll notice the wave file zooms in. What you might notice is quite tricky is that you want to do this and play and hear your sample. What you've got is a shift lock. So you can double click this and shift lock is enabled. That way I can scroll through, keeps the window open, and I can zoom in on my waveform. It always goes back after a few seconds to default, and I'm going to turn shift lock off, but just remember that you can lock the shift button. We've got attack, got hold, decay, playback effect, and then these two at the end depend on whatever playback effect you've selected. I'm not going to go through all of these, I just want to show you one as an example, but there's a bunch of these playback effects. It's not the playback mode. So far I haven't seen really any great options for that, so it's not your typical thing of one-shots or gated mode. It does exist in a sense because we can do like a gated group, but you kind of manually tweak those using like your attack and decay. It's not really like the typical sampler where it's just like one-shot mode or loop mode or whatever. You can enable it, but it's, yeah, you know what I'm saying. If we take a look here at playback effect, it's an effect. There's a bunch of these. You've got stretch, punch, 8-bit, whole bunch of things that you can apply on a per pad basis. If we do stretch, I just think it sounds really cool. sounds normal like this, but these two will now tweak those parameters. So if we, let's just tweak this a little. So that's the stretch factor. But play around with the grain sign is interesting, or grain size. Crank this up. You suddenly get that like old school jungle stretch sound. Really cool, and of course that's just on one pad. It's a really fun thing to mess around with. I just put that back. So sounds normal for now. So for every pad, you can tweak some parameters using the top 8 encoders there. When we move back to the drum rack itself, you'll notice we are on the pad select. There's 2 other icons. If you move over to the right, you'll see we've got a reverb send, and we also have some saturator. The first one is on a pad basis, and these are switchable, so you don't have to have reverb. You can set that up. It's got reverb and saturation on this particular default kit, but just like the others, we can click on the encoder and set things. So you've got a bunch of presets for the reverb, or you can come back a level and you can change that to any one of these effects that you've got. It's not a huge list, but it's good enough. I'm going to stick with reverb because I think that will be good for demonstration purposes. So we'll keep it on reverb. I'll choose Arena Tail, and that is being applied, this first effect, reverb send, to each pad, so on a pad basis. You'll hear nothing here. The way we apply that is with this end encoder, and with all of these encoders, what's nice is that as you increase the value, the little LED underneath lights up, so it gets dimmer or brighter depending on what you're doing. So if I crank this right up, so we get a lot of reverb, all of a sudden you can hear that. You can dial it in, but it's only on that particular pad. It's not here or here. If I want it there, I can apply it, but you have to dial it in. So when we come back and we look at the next effect, that affects everything inside of that drum kit. It's overall. So if we go back out of here, I don't want to use saturation. I want to use something else that's easier to see or hear. We'll use delay and set a preset of something like 8th dotted will do. Now as I do my snare, you can hear that effect, but it will be also on the hi-hats and also on the kick drums because this is applying it to the entire group. That's the difference there. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear. So you've got 2 effects that can be applied per track. It's not just for the drum kits, that's for your synths, anything else that you load up in here. There are 2 effects per track. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough. Don't forget this device resample, so you can bake those in and then reapply more effects and do that. There's plenty of ways to work around that. But 2 effects per track. So we've loaded in a track type of whatever we wanted, an instrument type, loaded some samples into that, played around with some of the effects. So it's time to begin recording something. You've got a step sequencer that you can input notes in. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. It's not my favorite way of putting things together. I prefer recording in real time, but if you're a step sequencer type of person, you can do that. You've got typical recording. I can press record. I can set a metronome with my shift button and the little clock icon here on this step. Oh, sorry. Tell a lie. That is for the tempo. Metronome, sorry, is the 2 circles next to it. It is this one. That turns your metronome on or turns the metronome off. I'm going to leave it off for now, but that's how you set that. We will come back though and take a look at tempo while it's open, but again, that is the clock icon is tempo. It's my bad getting those confused. I'm going to set the tempo up a little bit. I'm going to set it to more than what I want because I want to show you its party piece. So we've got 110 BPM. Shift and press it again. We'll close that menu out of the way, but it kind of holds it open, which is good. I'm now going to play something. We've got MIDI capture, which is something I never thought would be on the Move, something so small like this, but it allows us to just capture our ideas very easily. It's kind of always listening and remembers. It means that you don't have to begin by setting a tempo, putting a metronome on. We can just play and get started. This is a sketchpad after all. Let's play something. So when you're doing loops, it's useful to have a bar length in mind. I'm going to say 2 bars. We'll play our drums for 2 bars. I want to play them at a tempo that is slower. I know it's going to be slower than the 100 that we've got set so that I can show you how it recalculates that. So we had 106 or whatever it was set at before. Played about 2 bars worth. Press the MIDI capture button. And you can see it's caught our loop for us. You need to be working roughly in loops. That's going to make sense. You're timing that in your head. You can make that as long as you want. So you can be playing for 16 bars. I think there is a limit maybe to 16 bar lengths, perhaps, but that's a hell of a lot. While we're on the subject, a couple of other limits, but things that are actually quite good. When it comes to sampling directly into the device, you can actually stereo sample for 4 minutes per pad, which 4 minutes is a hell of a lot. So you want to put a whole vocal track in. Yeah, sure, if your track is longer than 4 minutes, you're into stuck and you'll have to work around that. But ultimately, yeah, 4 minutes of stereo sampling time per pad. It's pretty crazy. Same when you record from the mic, however you want to sample into this. But we've now created our first loop and we didn't have to set a BPM. It recalculated it to 82.5. It's still MIDI, so let's just round that down if we want to. We can do that with the tempo button. Just set it here. If you want the fine increments, let's say you've got a loop you're trying to work out the BPM of, you can do shift and that will give you fine increments when you change the tempo. But we'll just round it down. Let's even put it down to 81 BPM. Nice, simple stuff. I'm going to close the tempo menu again. So we've created now our first drum loop. We can add something else in, and I want to start looking at how we can expand upon our 4 tracks. So the next one here, I've got this choke group. I'm not doing any sampling in this one. This is from my template. So we'll swap this out for an instrument so we can mess around with it. We select it, make sure the whole group is selected, and come back. I'm going to come out of the templates because that's what it's looking at. And let's just go to the first thing. Doesn't have to be anything interesting. We'll go to wind instruments and let's see, we've got a clay flute. As soon as you select it, you can preview it. I can't hear a lot. It's probably because the octaves up and down. So let's move up a couple of octaves. And that's what these plus and minus buttons are for, coming up and down. Okay, sounds quite good. Maybe I want to try a different one. I can just scroll through. I like the sound of that one. That's going to be good enough for this episode. So I've now loaded that up. You'll see the pad structure changes. I can just click on this. We still get the same options. We've got 2 effects that we could mess around with. Maybe we'll tweak those in a second. And for my instrument, I have all of my options here for playing around. So I can tweak any of these parameters to suit myself. We're not going to deep dive. I've already shown you that. But I just wanted you to know that you can still do that here. Depending on the type of instrument, if you've loaded up one of the synths, there'll be oscillators, there'll be all that kind of stuff that you can tweak. So we can now noodle around. We can manually record again still, so we could do that kind of more traditional way. We'll get a count in and then start recording our flute. Or I can just play around with this thing while the beat is playing, see if I can work out a very basic loop, and then I can still use MIDI capture at this point to bring that in. So let's do that. Let's kick off our drums and just see if we can find something basic. Before we do that, this is in chromatic mode. I can tell because of the way the pads are lit up. You can hear that. If I want to change that to in key, we can do that. We still have in key like on the big push. We do our shift button and we choose this little numerical, this what's the word I'm looking for? This musical note even. We can select that and you will see it's set in chromatic mode. If I click on the encoder, I change it to in key, where we're going to just be playing the notes from a set scale. C major is the one that's currently on here, but of course you can change it to any key. Let's just change it to E as an example. And then with major, you've got a whole gang of scales that you can come through. I don't know, let's try this. Sounds quite good. If I want to go back to the instrument, let's maybe just tweak some of the effects just to make it sound a little bit nicer. I don't want this. I think maybe I'll swap the chorus out for a delay. And again, 8th dotted would be quite good. Works slightly differently in the sense that these will affect everything because when you've got the drum kit, it just applies it to a pair, a pair pad basis. But when we're applying this first effect here, because this is an instrument, it applies it to every note. Same when we move over. Just want to dial in the reverb a little bit. Yeah, good enough for this episode. Maybe come down as well as, the octaves a little bit. And again, if I just want to check my key, could try a different scale. Maybe we try, I don't know, go into F sharp. Yeah, kind of like that better. So let's just noodle around, see if we can work out something. Again, keeping, if you want to use the MIDI capture, just try and keep your bar length in mind. Something like that. And the great thing about in key, of course, is that it stays throughout the project, so I can move over to another instrument and keep the same key, play around. I want to start adding a bass line or building upon this. I'm not going to be able to hit any bum notes. You can switch it to chromatic, because of course there's reasons to do that sometimes for extra flexibility, but you've got the options of doing that. So very simple to get something started. We haven't spoke about quantization or anything like that. Let's say the notes that I just played then, they were, just recorded in out any quantization. You do have those options on this device. If I do shift, you can go to here. This weird little icon is all your quantize options. So you can quantize by a percentage to the grid. You've got your count in and so on and so forth. We won't go through all the options, but just know that you can do that. I'm going to close that menu. If I want to quantize the notes that I just played, I could do shift and then hit the quantize button. You'll see that is 100% quantized to 1/16 notes. Not a huge amount of change, but you get the idea. Let's go back to our drums where we can kind of explore that a little bit more. So when I played my drums in, I had no quantization. It's kept a nice little bit of human feel. We're going to deliberately get rid of that by doing the same thing. I'm going to shift and quantize those drums. The reason for that is because I want to show you that you can apply some swing, and we can take a quick look at the step sequencer. Not in depth, but enough to get you started. If we do shift here and we take a look at this little wave, it is the groove tool or the swing tool, kind of the same thing. As I crank this up now, we can apply some of that human swing back to our snapped 16th notes. Get the idea? I've applied some swing there. Sounds a little bit better. Sounds like we originally intended. While we're with the drums, it's an easy way to show you the step sequencer. Works like any other step sequencer. You select a pad, in this case the kick drums, and I want to add an extra kick drum in here somewhere. I could add one. The pads that are lit up in white are where you have notes inputted into the step sequencer. That's the kick drums. If I move to the hi-hats, you'll see wherever the hi-hats are, and the snares. If you've got 2 bars and you want to see the next bar, or of course you've got more bars than that, I use the arrow keys to switch over to bar 2. It tells you what you're looking at, which is nice and handy. We'll just stick with bar 1 for now. We're not going to do too many tweaks. If we go back to our kick drums, just a couple of other options. One of the main ones is the volume. So you can change a track volume. If you hold the track and then tweak this, you'll see I could adjust the overall track volume. I can also do it for a pad. So if I press a pad and I use this encoder here, I can make my drum sounds louder or quieter. You can see that in the wave display. So I could crank up my kick drums a bit, could make my snare drums a little quieter if I like. Good enough. With the step sequencer, we also have some options like that. So with the first one, let's go back to our kick drums. Let's say I've got my first kick drum. You'll notice as I press on a step and hold it, I could change the length of that. So if you're working with more melodic notes, we could change the note length, play around with those kind of things. But we've also got the option here, if I use the volume encoder again, to change the velocity. So I want this second kick drum to be a little bit quieter. I can do that. I can also nudge it as well. We won't go through all of the features, but I can nudge it using the arrow keys. So you want to start shifting things off the grid a little bit. I maybe want that timing of that to be a little bit lazy. I can nudge it over. You'll notice it nudges by 10%, but I can hold down shift and I can nudge by a single % if I want to. And don't forget, you can shift lock if you feel like you want to free up your fingers a little bit. So between the groove tool, the swing tool, and the ability to nudge things off of the steps, you can then really get kind of funky with it, put some like nice human swing in here. So we discovered some of the basic options. We can now select the type of instrument, select the type of track that we want to create, move through, we can play melodies, we can record things, we can record drums. The big thing that everyone was griping about was the fact that you only have 4 tracks. That is true. When you think about it, we've already used up 2 of our available tracks because we've got a drum track and we've also got this melody playing. But that's where resampling comes into play. And I'm not going to go into it in this particular episode, but you can automate. So you want to start automating some effects onto these. You're just creating clips. As we've created our little drums here, and the same with our melody, we are creating clips just like you do in Ableton. We use this browsing button, this little burger icon, to switch over to our clips view. You can see both of those clips. They're going to play when I press play. If I want to stop one, you get the idea. And of course, we can delete those clips. There isn't really a song mode per se, but that is how you work it. You're going to create clips and they would be the kind of chunks of the song. So one of these could just be like your intro clip, then you could do your chorus and your verse, and then you can bounce around between those. You can send that out to Ableton when you want to get a little bit more deep and use the arranger. But actually, I think I could put together some pretty good song structures just using what we've got here and bouncing back and forth between the clips. That can be recorded out as audio. There is a way to do that with the manager. Anyway, we won't get into that again for this particular episode, but we are creating these clips. Let's move back. What I want to do now is talk about the idea that we have these drum racks. Drum racks are pretty important because they allow us to play more than just one shots. You can load up 4-minute long bits of audio, I believe, in these. I don't know what the ultimate limit is, but I know recording is 4 minutes. So certainly you could have 4 minutes of audio playing. But we can use resampling now in order to free up our track. So we've made this nice little flute riff. We want to have that, but why should it take up one entire track on its own when we could actually resample that and put it into the drum rack and play along? It's very easy to do as well on the device. What we need to do is we need to have somewhere where we want to put this. I know in this case, I've got a bunch of free pads in this drum kit because I'm only using these 3 drum sounds currently. So let's say I want to pop that loop in here. I can do that. When we're playing back though, I don't want the drums to be playing because we're going to be resampling the output. So we're going to mute this track. And that way, when we play, we're only listening to our flute loop. That's what we want. I don't need to be on that track. I just need to be on the track where I want to record to. Could be any of the other tracks. We could have drum racks on all of these. And you can record to an individual sample pad, but for this demonstration, it's easier just to record it to something inside of a drum rack. We're going to go to sampling, which we press the record button, and then we get our options. If there was something plugged to the line in, I'd be able to see that when I flick through the options. We won't see anything here because nothing is plugged in, but I can choose currently between resampling, which is what we want, or I can switch to the microphone input. We're going to go back to resampling, which is resampling the output of this device. So what do we want to do next? We want to resample our flute loop. It starts recording whatever is currently being played. So it's going to start the playback when I press one of these pads. So very simple to get started. All I do is choose an empty pad, and then I can record this for as many bars as I want. We've got 2 bars, but if I wanted to record it for 16 bars, I could do that. I'm going to keep it short, but let's do that. Press stop on the recording, and that has now been recorded. We can tell because we can mute our flute track, and we can turn this drum kit back on. And if I press this pad, and you'll see in the waveform view, there is our recording. There is one thing again when we talk about firmware updates that I would like to see, or if anyone has figured this out, please let me know in the comments. When you play a loop like this, I can't find any way to stop that. Like on the MPC, there is a quick kill. You hit your play button a couple of times. Any long samples that are playing will be cut short. The only way that I've found to do it so far on this device, it's a little bit hacky, but if I play the loop even, I can tweak the hold button for a second just to turn it off. But really, there should be an easy way to stop long samples playing. If Ableton happen to be watching this, please give us that in an update, because it's kind of important. If I had 16 bars worth of this, it gets pretty annoying if that wants to play the whole way through. And I don't feel that moving this and changing the hold is an ideal way to stop it from playing. Again, maybe it's in the manual that I've just missed somehow. I've tried the play button, stopping recording, even trying to trigger clips. I cannot get a long sample to stop playing without doing that. Let us know in the comments if you know how to fix it. So we've now recorded that. So we are using one less track because we don't need this track anymore. I can come in here. I think that's still muted. We can unmute it. But if we go to the clip where that little, flute riff is, I can use delete and just delete the clip out. Be careful with your deleting on the device as well. It is permanent and it's one of those things, I don't think you can undo. Oh, wait, actually, maybe you can. No? Yes, you can. All right, you don't have to be as careful as I thought. For some reason, I thought I read somewhere that deleting things was kind of permanent. But anyway, good to know you can undo that. Let's delete the clip. So we've deleted that. We currently don't have the flute here. If we go back to our drum kit, that is loaded up. In order for that loop to be playing while the drums are playing, I just need to import it onto the first step. And again, we'll wait for that sample to finish. Got to be a way to be able to stop that. But what you'll notice, of course, is we've now freed up our track. And if you think about the idea that overall, as you're building this, I could have technically 4 drum kits, so 64 looped samples, things that I've recorded, all playing at exactly the same time. And it also frees up the clip, because when we go back to our clip, I've now only got one clip that has my drums and, of course, my little melodic flute loop that we've just recorded playing at exactly the same time. But still full independent control of being able to tweak it. We can apply effects to this. I can change the individual volume of just that pad. So you want to balance things out, you can do that. You've got complete control of that there. That's really what I wanted to show you, because this idea of 4 tracks, you can kind of look at it that way, or you can look at it like 64 tracks with 4 output buses. I think that's a much more exciting way of looking at how to use this device. The final thing I just want to touch upon, I will do sample chopping in another episode because I don't want to make this one too long. I just want to show you loops. Now, we've already kind of taken a look at loops. There's a couple of other things I want to look at. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to go to the next track. I'm going to mute this one. Just mute that out of the way. We'll go down a track. I'm going to go to my encoder. Move back because I want to go to templates and load up just another blank drum kit for now. I hadn't really seen any videos that spoke about bringing loops in. Now, it's pretty obvious that you can bring loops into this. Again, if you think about having 4 drum racks, 64 slots to put loops in, you could have 64 loops all firing at the same time. That's pretty exciting. But I just hadn't really seen it on a video, so I wanted to talk about it, and it also brings up something that I think should be also addressed in the firmware updates. We've now got a new drum kit where we can load samples into any of these pads. I want to pick a sample. And this time what I did with the Move Manager is I loaded in a couple of drum breaks. Let's open that up. Here you'll see the first problem. This was mentioned in something else. I think somebody in one of just the forums had commented on this, and it was actually true. You'll notice there isn't a lot of the sample information there. If you've got something that is named Kick 1, that's fine. It shows up perfectly well in the display. But what we should be seeing here, hopefully in a firmware update or some way of working around this, is that these should scroll so that you can see the information, because I've got a couple of drum loops, maybe it's a melodic loop, whatever it is. I can't have all of my samples really just named as kick 1 or kick 2, because with a melodic loop, perhaps I want to know the BPM, the key of it, how many bars it is. When I record samples and I create samples, I always put that information in because that's information you're going to want to see. And even with something like this, I actually shortened one of these hoping that we could see everything that I needed. I think this top one, I just brought it down to the BPM and the bar length, really, really short. it still doesn't give me enough without taking out maybe like the creator, but then you lose that information. You're trying to find something from a sample pack. This is something that needs to be addressed with a firmware update for sure, and I'm pretty confident they'll be able to do that, because as you can see, I want to load a loop. How do I know what the BPM or the bar length is of this? If we select one, let's move down. Let's just audition this one. When you're auditioning longer samples, it's based on the playback, the hold of this. So again, it doesn't play the full thing. You're not like tortured by having to listen to the entire 2 bars, it sounds like there for that particular sample. But yeah, it's based off of that. So we can load this particular sample in. You'll notice as the screen changes here, I can see a little bit more information, but actually the bar length and stuff is still missing. So yeah, it gets a little bit better. But come on, Ableton, we need to be able to see at least a good chunk more of our samples when we're browsing for them. That was the reason I wanted to bring up loops, but also to show you that you can work with loops on the device. So we know we've got 60 BPM. Let's do Shift, go to the clock icon, and let's tweak the project down to 60 BPM. We're forgetting the first drum kit. We don't need to worry about that. It's muted. It's not going to be playing. So now when I press play, if we input it, of course, onto the first step, you can hear again having to wait for that. But you can see that we have loaded up a loop and it is playing. One thing that you might need to adjust is the loop length, and you've got this loop button here. You just want to work with a loop. I've got a feeling this is a 2-bar loop, so I'm going to move it up to 2 bars, and we can play it again. You'll notice we lost the audio. That is due to hold. So we go back into hold and just crank that up, make sure it's set at the max. Just going to use hold to stop that sample. Now, there was something strange there, and it's because I've moved the attack by accident. Don't want the attack because it's putting a little fade in at the beginning of the sample. But as you can hear, we can set off loops. Definitely need a stop button for our loops though. Because I need to stop it playing. So that's going to be it for today's episode. I hope it's a good insight into getting up and running with this thing. Another way at looking at it, don't be put off by the small screen and the 4 tracks, because really, as you've seen hopefully in this demonstration, you can make it a lot more capable than that by just thinking about it differently. Work with loops, work with resampling. It's all about how you create. It's about thinking outside of the box. You can layer samples, you can resample as many times as you want. Even if you're concerned about the effects, you've only got 2 effects per track, well fine, play that track but then resample it so that you can apply more effects on the top of it. It's just a different workflow, and I think it's very speedy, very intuitive, and a hell of a lot of fun. We will deep dive in the next episode. We'll go into something like sample chopping. I want to get into that, show you some of these things in greater detail. But this is my first overall impression. Having only owned this for a few hours playing around with it, I think it's a hell of a lot of fun, and I think Ableton have done a very good job with it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take care.